Now let's take a look at some of the different kinds of strokes that we can use to lay down our sculpted data. So back in Blender, we've got a fresh grid here, and we're going to come down just to this little stroke area. So this defines how the strokes are actually laid down. So when we make a brush stroke, it's made up of these little sort of instances of this curve. So think of this as sort of one single dot, and then it lays those together to create our smooth stroke. So right now we've got a spacing stroke method selected, and we've got the spacing set to 10%. If we increase this amount, you can see that we're actually seeing those instances of that particular brush. So we get these little dots. So when you take this spacing down closer, the dots get closer and closer together. Come down here to something 10% or below, and it basically makes it look like it's one stroke. Okay, we're not seeing those dots anymore. You can also come in and you can create some jitter. So if you want to create sort of a bumpy skin pattern, you can jitter those dots so they're kind of going back and forth. If you want them to be in a straight line, you can take that down to 0. Okay, we can also, sometimes it's difficult to get, if you're trying to get a really smooth line, sometimes it's hard to get that, especially if you're going over long distances. So in those cases, you can turn on smooth stroke. And what smooth stroke will do is it'll create a trail behind your stroke, and it'll sort of even out your stroke. So it lets you come in and you can create something that is a lot more smooth using that. And the radius, it'll make that trail a little bit longer. Okay, and so what you can do to use that is you can use that to kind of smooth out your strokes. And Shift S will allow you to toggle back and forth between using smooth stroke or not. Now, as far as the stroke methods go, we looked at space. Dots is going to be similar to that. You can see we still have the jitter amount there. We can jitter that. We also have the ability to drag out a single copy, basically, of that. So if we had some sort of a texture, which we'll look at later, but let's say we wanted to just kind of drag out one copy of whatever brush we have selected, you can use anchored. And so you can see here as I click and drag, it's actually placing one instance of that. So this is really good for adding really specific things. If you were adding a mole or adding some bolts to something, you could come in and really quickly place this. And you can see right now it's creating this from the center of my stroke. So if I place my cursor right here, click and drag it out, you can see that that's being placed from the center. If you want to go edge to edge, you simply click on the little toggle right here. And then as I click this out, you can see it's creating it from one corner to the other. So the corner where I start my stroke and then the corner where I end are basically opposite corners if this is kind of a square shape. All right, so that's the anchored stroke. We also have drag dot. So drag dot's kind of the same, where you can just click and put this single instance wherever you want it, at whatever strength it happens to be. So again, this is good for placing details like that. We can also use the airbrush. So the airbrush, the difference with the airbrush, and let me turn off the jittering. The difference with the airbrush is that if I complete my stroke, so I'm going to just create a stroke over here, and I just keep holding down, it's going to continue to add to that. So as I'm holding down, it's continuing to add, ostensibly painted detail, but in this case it's sculpted detail. And so you can see there what happens with that. Okay, if I don't have that and I just click, it's going to just stop. It's not going to continue to build up as long as I have the pen or mouse held down. So that's the difference with the airbrush. You also have a line, so if you need to create like a straight line, with whatever brush size that you have selected, you can come in and really quickly create some sculpted detail using the line method. And then also if you draw out a curve, you can use the curve method. So if you have a specific kind of shape that you want to get, you can draw that out as a curve and use that stroke. Okay, and a lot of these strokes will have similar settings here. And so what you can do is just kind of modify those as you go through it. And then spacing is going to be kind of the default. And you can get, if you want to kind of see the instances of it, you want to increase the spacing. If you want a nice smooth stroke, decrease that spacing amount so that those instances kind of blend together to create that single stroke. Okay, so that's going to be found underneath your stroke area inside of your sculpting tools. So the next thing that we'll talk about is using symmetry. So most of or a lot of the models at least that we'll be sculpting, especially like character models, you're probably going to be they're probably going to be symmetrical at least at some point. And so having the tools function in that way so that you can just sculpt on one side makes a lot of sense. So let's take a look in the next lesson at working with the symmetry tools as we sculpt.